Welcome everybody into another episode of Purple Insider. Let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings and how good they actually are. I want to know from you guys. Thank you for all the feedback on that, by the way. I want to know how good you guys think this team is, whether you want to say that in a win-loss record, whether you want to say that in this is a Super Bowl contender, this is a playoff contender, however you feel like you want to take these two games, the accumulation of them, and present them in some way of answering that question. How good is this team? Are they really this good? Is actually how I phrased it, kind of on purpose, because beating the San Francisco 49ers was so impressive for this Vikings team that they outplayed them. And what I was saying before, we had a little audio glitch, but now we're good to go, was just that when you try to evaluate a game and what it means, what I like to do is try to figure out what is sustainable, what's real. Did you actually outplay your opponent, or did you bump into a victory by accident? And we've seen the Vikings do that. And we had that conversation in 2022 quite a bit of, all right, that game against Washington was so weird. Taylor Heineke threw an interception, and hey, they were over in London and they had a field goal, do a double doink. But then at the same time, I thought it wasn't quite fair to call all one-score wins the same thing. So a good example is yesterday. That is a one-score win, but the Vikings won by more than one score in the way that they actually played that football game. They were better at protecting Sam Darnold than San Francisco was at protecting Brock Purdy. They ran the football effectively. They pressured the quarterback. They made plays in the secondary. They made plays on special teams. They came through in the clutch moments that won the game, meaning some third downs, so some key spots. Now, they did screw up some in the red zone with turnovers, but I actually thought the fact that they won despite the turnovers was something that you could look at as being telling, where if a team is able to still find a way to win, despite having a couple of turnovers, and get those back on the other side to make plays, to do it, and to overall pass the football more effectively, I thought, than San Francisco, even though some of their stats ended up looking good for a major part of the game. Brock Purdy was not looking as comfortable as you would expect him to look with this 49ers tremendous offense. So when you evaluate a game like that and you go over all of the data and all of the film and everything else, and your takeaway is, wow, this team actually played better than somebody who was in the Super Bowl last year and who trounced the New York Jets in week one, then I think it is deserving of saying that they are good, but that good to be able to beat any team and any contender that comes in here. I wonder how much you guys also are using next week to evaluate that same question. Are you looking at next week against Houston to say, all right, confirm that you're really that good? Or are we saying a 2-1 start would be so good regardless of what happens for next week? And Houston is one of the best teams in the entire NFL. I don't know that it's always fair to use every single week as a referendum on how good the Minnesota Vikings actually are, because there is going to be a game in there that just doesn't go their way and doesn't work out. So I don't think we can, if they lose this week, say, well, they were never that good and they were a fraud. Yes, Tycoon, it is a week-to-week league, as we very well know. And maybe that is one of the parts that makes the NFL so fun and so compelling, is that everything we thought we knew changes every single week. But when we try to be steady and evaluate what they can actually be, this is why some people have invented statistics for this, like DVOA, the old Football Outsiders stat, was basically invented to try to help you not ride the wave as much and give you a clear-cut version of what your team actually is. And when I go from kind of position to position and how they perform through 2 weeks, that's where you start to come to the conclusion, and through a very small sample size, that they can continue to be this good and that they can be a double-digit win team. The other part of it too is just how the competition looks. When you start to look around the NFC, you go, okay, well, I do believe Detroit is still a very strong team, despite the fact that they lost to Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay actually looks surprisingly strong. We're going to get more of a sense tonight about the Atlanta Falcons and some other questionable teams, but Washington, New York, we can already check a number of teams off of the list of someone who could be a surprise or could be competitive. Arizona made their case as a potentially interesting team. San Francisco still belongs in the conversation. Green Bay being able to win with their backup quarterback against the team that is supposed to be good, that makes them dangerous. So I would not slide Green Bay or Detroit off the list of teams the Vikings will be fighting with. But I think already you can say that there's a few of them, all right, that they're not even in this discussion. The Saints are much better than I ever would have expected the Saints to be. Clint Kubiak, man, wow. The last two games for Clint Kubiak, what an incredible performance from their offensive coordinator with the weapons they have. That's going better than I ever would have expected. But the NFC South might be a little bit stronger with more teams fighting for playoff spots. So all of those things kind of play into how tough is it going to be? How tough is your schedule going to be? The Jacksonville Jaguars are on this schedule. They don't look very difficult. I can't imagine what Will Levis will do and what madness might happen with him against a Brian Flores defense. And those are games that look a little bit more winnable. But when we go through the positions, the offensive line is worth a discussion because there was only 9 pressures on Sam Darnold in this game, according to PFF. And that is amazing. And as part of it is Darnold getting rid of the football, and he did a very good job of that. But this is an offensive line that you guys and us have picked apart so much over the years, and deservedly so at times. But to have offensive tackles like this, Garrett Bradbury had a bounce back game. The way that they're running the ball, to have actually a duo running the ball in the backfield with Chandler and Jones, where I'm struggling to find is a serious weak point in the offense or the defense, a catastrophic weak point. And if they were going to be tested, it certainly would have happened with the wide receivers of the 49ers, but the secondary was able to hold up. Stephon Gilmore looks great out there. Shaq Griffin has been fine. Byron Murphy missed a couple tackles. That seems to be like it's going to be an issue from week to week, but that hasn't been too much trouble. I think that Jerry Tillery has solidified that interior D-line, and even Taki Taimani, the random undrafted free agent. I was watching the film back going, Taki Taimani, everybody. I had a few very good reps against the 49ers, and suddenly this team is deeper than we expected them to be. And when we say, are they really that good? Depth is a big part of it. That it's something that this team has just not had in previous years. And as I kind of bounce back and forth, how about the depth of the wide receivers? The fact that Jalen Naylor could make that catch in a huge situation like he did. Not only that, but we also saw Brandon Powell get open. And he's somebody that's developed over a couple of years. And we've also seen, somebody like Tristan Jackson even farther down. He didn't have any impact plays, but yesterday, but someone that could be trusted to go out there when they need to. This is depth that they just have not had in recent years. Losing somebody like Jordan Addison would have been a big problem, but the fact is that it really wasn't in yesterday's game against the 49ers. So there's a lot of things there that you could talk about week to week being sustainable for the Vikings. Even being able to work their way through a handful of injuries is such a big deal for them. And that is something that we weren't really sure about going into the season, because even though it looked that way in training camp, and even though I came out of training camp probably feeling better about this team than a lot of people did who didn't watch practice, which is why I do this, to tell you what's going on out there. And we kept going, man, Sam Darnold keeps completing these deep passes to Justin Jefferson. And I present you with Sam Darnold to Justin Jefferson. And you know what? This defense is dominating in those joint practices. We did 2 podcasts each day about how good they were in the joint practices. And then when it came to the questions, all right, how good is Stephon Gilmore going to be at this age? The answer is pretty darn good. How good is Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel going to be as guys that are stepping into a new team? And the answer is pretty darn good so far, especially Andrew Van Ginkel. But that's not to, downplay Jonathan Grenard. Jonathan Grenard has been their leader in pressures through the first couple of games, and Blake Cashman and all these things. I mean, this is where so much of the conversation was focused on one position and one player, and that was Sam Darnold / JJ McCarthy and the quarterback situation. And I understand that, but seeing the new players come together, and also I think what you're seeing too, and I'm not saying this will happen to the Vikings, but you're seeing why veteran teams are usually the ones that win the Super Bowls and not young teams, because of experience. The fact that a Blake Cashman can show up on a team that plays a totally different scheme than what he was playing last year and have an impact like he did on Sunday, that's not just an edge rusher. That's a complicated position in Brian Flores' defense. That is a big upgrade over what they had. It is a big upgrade to have Andrew Van Ginkel over someone like DJ Wanham last year. And even to have Tillery in the middle to be a solid player is a big upgrade. And I just look at what they have here, and I don't see where it's going to collapse into the ocean. Now, of course, the health of the corners is going to be a big deal. The health of the offensive line and the tackles is going to be a big deal. That goes for just about everything. But it really comes down to, if you can have Sam Darnold play with any form of consistency like that, then the Vikings are really this good. Then they are really a contender to, I don't want to say go all the way, but to be in the NFC and in the playoffs, and a serious team that you would put up there with your best teams in the NFC. They can be that if they have the type of performances that they've gotten from Sam Darnold for the last 2 weeks. How many of these can come from Sam Darnold over a 17-game season is really the question here. And Steve Palazzolo tweeted out an unbelievable stat about Sam Darnold, is that through the first 3 weeks of a season in his career, any season through the first 3 weeks, his grade was something, PFF grade was something like 85 and 45 after week 3. So I guess after this week, we're going to keep a closer eye out. But when you have Jefferson, when you have Kevin O'Connell's offense dialing up some easy touchdowns like the last 2 weeks to Jalen Naylor, I think consistency becomes a lot more plausible for Sam Darnold than it's been in the past. And if you get 8, 10, 12 performances like this, there are games down the road that the defense can win themselves if they continue to be this good. The defense can beat Tennessee. The defense can beat Chicago. You're not going to have to be perfect like Sam Darnold nearly had to be, the one interception there, but he had to play an A-plus football game to beat the 49ers. There will be games where he doesn't have to do that. So let's get into your thoughts here, questions and comments about how good this team really is, or are they really as good as the team that we saw yesterday? Digital Plains Media says, feels like this Vikings team can win games in multiple different ways. The first time it has felt like that since 2017. Yeah, you're alluding to the exact same point that I was just making, is that there will be games down the road where you don't need Sam Darnold to outplay the other quarterback by a million miles. Not that he outplayed Purdy by a million miles, but he definitely outplayed Purdy. That the defense is going to be able to keep them ahead in games, and they've already had one of those games. I mean, Darnold was very good in week 1, but even if he had been mediocre, they're still winning that game because the defense is so good. And Daniel Jones, who's not a great quarterback, who is a mediocre to bad quarterback, looked like he shouldn't play in the league. And Brock Purdy, who I consider to be a great quarterback and did make some seriously awesome plays in yesterday's game, even more than I remembered when I looked back at the tape. They made him look mediocre at times. So if this defense is going to knock every opposing quarterback down a peg, or at least a good number of them, then the door is open. And then also when Darnold does have a rougher day, then you can have the defense win you a game. That means to me that they might really be this good, but I guess that depends on your definition of this good. This good meaning better than the 49ers this year? I don't know about that. Although Deebo Samuel got hurt, so no guarantees that team is going to go back to the Super Bowl with some of the injuries that they've had, or be the best team in the NFC. Digital Plains Media also says Zim and Kirk years lean on teams with the running game and play through the defense. KOC and Kirk put up 30 points across your fingers. Seems like one cohesive team for the first time. Right. I see what you're saying. You're kind of combining the two philosophies, but those philosophies were pretty much formed out of necessity in a lot of ways for KOC, having to score 30 points that was what he had to do because they were so short on defense. And it really shows you what some money will do on the defensive side when you can go out and sign players who are perfect for your defensive coordinator, who are aggressive, intelligent, experienced. And Brian Flores is really just doing the same thing he did in Miami. When he got to Miami in 2019, they were not a good defense that first year for him. And by the second season, they were a top 10 defense. And they added free agents and brought in players that he was experienced with. And it worked out extremely well for Brian Flores in Miami. And he's just done the same exact thing here. He's able to identify really well what types of players work for him. Blake Cashman is a great example of that. This is a guy that I don't know how well known Blake Cashman was. He was to us because we're in Minnesota and he's a Gopher, but to sign a guy like that and know that he's going to bring as much as he has to this team already in 2 weeks, it is just really good ability to identify which players are going to be difference makers for your type of defense. That's something Flores seems to be excellent at. And then also identifying undrafted free agents who could step in as well. But experience matters so much with the defense. And they've just got a bunch of guys out there who have played so much football in their careers that they can run different looks out of stuff that you wouldn't expect. You could put a lot on their plate for a game plan. You can give them really difficult matchups. And then we see a little bit of development. Patrick Jones playing an excellent game yesterday. There's a little bit of development there. And I think we've seen that from some other players as well. It's been quite impressive. So are they really this good? I don't know if that means they'll finish the year with a better record than San Francisco, or that we should start putting them quite in the discussion for the best team in the entire NFC. One of them might be playing tonight with the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, wow, my Dallas is great. Took a real hit yesterday. Wow, I never saw that coming. I thought that was going to be a good game between the Saints and the Cowboys, but they just got completely run out of the building. We've seen Zimmer make his adjustments before, but that whole Dallas is the best team in the NFC. After 1 week, it looked great. After 2 weeks, not so much. But at least the Vikings, because of who they beat, get to be in that conversation for this week. John says, it's through this community where I set aside draft negativity, recognizing the converse brilliance of free agency and roster building into today's salary constraints. Well said, John. Eloquently put, to not worry too much about that 2022 draft, which I have not heard about recently, especially since two of the players from the draft, they weren't taken high, but they were pretty big yesterday, Ty Chandler and Jalen Naylor. We can't forget as we talk about that draft that those guys came from that. Ingram had a better game. It wasn't a good game overall, but it was better. And I believe he only allowed one quarterback pressure, which is the most important stat there. The grades weren't great, but it might have been a hang on for dear life type of thing. So, I mean, at least he is a starting player. We'll see how much longer that continues. But Chandler and Naylor really had big games yesterday. But yes, what you're talking about is you can never really just hope that the draft solves all of your problems. It kind of speaks to what I was talking about with everyone loves younger players. Everybody loves this draft pick. And I like that guy coming out of college. And you have to hit on some. Well, they have hit on some. Jordan Addison's really good. Ivan Pace, I count them as draft picks if they're undrafted free agents because your team identified the guy and went and got him. So Ivan Pace, they are filling in with Taki Taimani, but draft picks have to be developed. They also have to be guys who are fitting into spots where they can grow over a couple years, not answers to immediate questions. And I think that was maybe the mistake with some of the moves that they made in that 22 draft was trying to, with those first few picks, answer every question on the roster. And maybe that was a miscue, but going into free agency and having that money to spend. And also it can't be downplayed. And this is why I saw some people saying, hey, extend O'Connell now. We'll have that conversation as we go forward, but it cannot be downplayed that these free agents wanted to come to Minnesota. Cashman, okay, he's from here. Everyone loves Minnesota who's from here, but Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel. Van Ginkel's family might be Vikings fans also, so that could be a factor for him. Maybe they had that element. This is an organization that has proven itself over the last couple of years as a destination for free agents. You just needed the money to be able to get him to come here. And that's what they got in moving on from Kirk Cousins, because you could structure the contracts even for these free agents and maybe not Stephon Gilmore as much, but the other guys, to have bigger cap hits down the road. You could structure it that way. And that ended up, working out pretty well to be able to bring in all of this talent, but you got to have the cap space to do it. And then once you do, they can continue to build on this through free agency. So people will say, don't build through free agency. And I think that is largely true, as you can't create a whole free agent roster. It's not Madden, but when you already have some key pieces like Harrison Smith and the others that they have built over a couple of years, and the tackles and the receivers, then you can go fill in those last spots. And I want to get into, I'm going to record a podcast with John Krasinski later in the week about the Vikings roster building and timeline, because he's really sharp on stuff like that. But I've been thinking about it a lot, how this free agency, they went in and identified perfect guys for them and were able to get them, which has been really the difference maker between, they're an up and down defense, to, veterans are veterans for a reason. They're more consistent. Aaron says 2-0, did not see it coming. My preseason pick 10-7 is bearing out, but they might be better if they beat the Texans. How good can they be? That's really the question. If they beat the Texans, then we are having the discussion about the best team in the NFC. We truly are, because Houston, if you watched them last night, they are such a good team. I mean, top to bottom, great receivers, great quarterback. If Mixon is healthy, that's something to watch this week. But if Mixon is healthy, they have a good running game. The one thing that they don't have is maybe the greatest offensive line. So that might be something to watch for this team that now suddenly pressures quarterbacks consistently. And on the defensive side, Stingley is fantastic. They're edge rushers. We know them. They are wonderful. So that if they can play with Houston, and if they can beat Houston at US Bank Stadium, then we are going farther with this discussion than kind of saying, you know what, I think they might be this good, but I'm not ready to totally say it yet because I need bigger sample, and I definitely need bigger sample from the quarterback. But the early returns are much better than I think anyone expected. Well, I guess we're going to find out if Manny Hill expected these returns to be as good as they are. Manny, we got tons of great questions and comments from people already. Welcome in this evening, and what an evening it is. I want you to say, before I jump back into the comments about answering our question, are the Vikings this good? How'd you feel yesterday? How'd you feel watching that? It was pretty entertaining day for everybody.
It really was. Like, it was just a fun, I thought, well-played football game. I think we saw a lot of really good things from both teams. It felt like the Vikings defense played really well, but at the same time, you could see throughout the entire game why San Francisco is as good as they are. Like, they're as good as advertised, and we saw the Vikings really go toe-to-toe with them for 60 minutes. And it was just a fun game. It was good to see the Vikings defense play well. It was good to see Sam Darnold play well. And even though Aaron Jones didn't really have a super productive day, Ty Chandler was able to step in and really kind of pick up some of that slack in the running game too. So, overall, it was just a lot of fun, and it was I was thoroughly entertained, and the fan side of me was really happy to see the Vikings come away with a win.
I think that what was really interesting about the game is that it was a lot of players who are not necessarily the players that we expect who were making plays. And I mean, Jefferson with a 97-yard touchdown is, of course, that guy. But
Yep.
Ty Chandler, you mentioned, had a great game, and he came through numerous times. And Jalen Naylor probably had the biggest catch of the entire day, other than the 97-yard touchdown. But his spinning grab from Sam Darnold, who just threw an absolute laser beam to him. But those aren't superstars. And even Garrett Bradbury bounced back. And on the defensive side, it was Cashman, but it's also Patrick Jones. And that's where you don't want to go down the 2017 road, because that's just not right to go there yet until we really see it. In fact, we didn't even know 2017 was going to be 2017 until maybe like week 10, where we could really say, all right, okay, this is going somewhere. But we couldn't really even say it until Case Keenum got hot in the middle of that season. But it does remind me of that way when there was a game where Everson Griffin got hurt and B-Rob came off the bench and played extremely well. And there were, Dalvin Cook gets hurt. And then there's the running back duo of Latavius Murray and Jerick McKinnon. Like this, it doesn't have to be the same guy every single week. And I got that feeling yesterday where I went, a lot of different people contributed to this thing. It wasn't just, well, if Jefferson doesn't do it, then nobody's going to do it.
I have a question for you, because you mentioned, and I'm glad you brought up the 2017 team, because I don't think that this is quite that. But could this be 2015?
And you mean as a team that we didn't really expect to take the big step yet, that we thought was maybe a year away, and then they were kind of surprising. I think, maybe the difference there is that 2015 had more young players that they were relying on, and those young players suddenly were good. Stephon Diggs started to emerge in that season. Eric Kendricks, of course. Danielle Hunter starts to step in and do his thing. Where on this team, I mean, the 2017 comparison, and again, not quite fair, really comes down to how many veterans there were at that point in 2017. It was a team of all experienced players, and that's what we're seeing here. And I think when we look at how this roster is really constructed, to talk about them as a team on the rise for the future isn't quite right. That's one position. That's quarterback, as they're on the rise for the future. That's also Rob Brzezinski and his salary cap space is on the rise for the future. But I mean, you have Hawkinson's going to come back. That's a veteran. It's almost hard to go across the roster and find someone that we don't have a sample size on. I mean, Ivan Pace is still growing as a player. He's a young guy. And then who? I mean, Ty Chandler is unproven, but he's also like 25 years old. I mean, it's not someone who's super, super young. So this is a team that has proven players across the entire roster. And that's what makes me think that when we say, are they this good? It's yes, only if, of course, Sam Darnold does his thing. And Is the Faithful says, stats lie a lot. The Vikings were Fred Warner away from absolutely dominating the Niners. I agree with that, Manny. That was one of the best games I've ever seen from a linebacker. But outside of Fred Warner, they did decidedly outplay the San Francisco 49ers.
They really did. And I tweeted out, after the Aaron Jones fumble, I just basically said, Fred Warner almost single-handedly took 2 touchdowns away from the Vikings in that game, with the interception and then the punching of the football out from Aaron Jones. I mean, the Vikings were in position to score. I mean, Aaron Jones was on his way into the end zone, literally on that play. And then even on the interception, the Vikings were in scoring position to really to really get on the board. So, I mean, that guy's a monster, man. And and I think that's what made the win yesterday even more impressive, is that we know San Francisco is good, but we also saw like a lot of their key players make big plays in the game, and the Vikings were able to withstand that. You know what I mean? Fred Warner, as we just mentioned, was just a monster. We saw Nick Bosa make, plays and be kind of troublesome on the defensive front. Hargrave made some plays. Even, Mason in the running game was still really productive for them. And even Brock Purdy, even though, the Vikings were getting to him and making him uncomfortable at times, he still made some throws and made some things happen. And I think all of those things sort of happening for the 49ers, and the Vikings able to kind of withstand that in a way that I don't think we've seen them do in the past. You know what I mean? 2022, they were in a lot of close games and they found ways to win those games. But when you see things like the interception happen, like Aaron Jones having the ball punched out and he's 2 feet from the end zone, for a long time, particularly in the Kirk Cousins era, those type of things would happen, and it would be very hard for them to kind of overcome those things. And for them to do that, for the 49ers to keep throwing haymakers at them and the Vikings to hang in there and hang on and win, that was really impressive. And it was just it was really exciting to watch.
The key word to me is fluky. It was not fluky. And
No.
when you're figuring out and you go around the league and you start to ask, hey, well, this team's 2-0, or this team, has got a surprise win. Is that real? Is that a fluke? Did they just get lucky? And I did an article about the 2022 team where I tried to identify which one-score games were really one-score games, and which ones were the Vikings were leading and it ended up as a one-score game. And that's yesterday. The Vikings are outplaying them. They get a field goal at the end that makes it a one-score game, but they outplayed them to the point where it was probably more than that. And I used this method with win percentage. Like, what was the win percentage in the fourth quarter? If the Vikings had a 90% win percentage in the fourth quarter, that means they'd outplay the other team for 3 quarters. Remember the Miami game against Teddy? They were the better team for almost all of that game. It gets a little close at the end. Mike Gesicki tried to do the gritty, but that game, the Vikings were the better team. So you're trying to really identify that. And that's where I don't feel anything that's happened in these 2 weeks has been fluky. I feel like they have been so decidedly the better team that we could start to say, yes, they may be actually this good. I shot you 99. I'm noticing a trend in these 2 games. The quarterback from the opposing team holding on to the ball too long is something I've heard over the last 2 games. Is the secondary better than we thought? You know what? I think that is a Brian Flores stat, or anecdotes from people saying that the guy is holding onto the ball too long. That's what I think, Manny, is that when I went back and looked at the tape today, I saw a lot of Brock Purdy not being able to quickly get the football out of his hands, not quickly being able to identify where it was supposed to go. And now you can't even throw a bubble screen because Andrew Van Ginkel might turn it into an interception. He was this close at the end zone when they threw one, from tipping it up in the air and grabbing it. And then at the end of the game, he almost did it again. So he had 2 of those yesterday, but there was another one where they tried to run kind of a little screen thing, and Van Ginkel, rather than going after the passer, he identified that and went wide. And that was the one where he got the sack because Purdy looked over there like, oh, it's not there because Van Ginkel's in my way, and then tried to run, and he ends up getting taken down. But I think that the coverage, it's not so much the secondary players, although they are better for sure, but I think it's the combination of the players and all the different looks that they're able to give teams like the 49ers. And that's why even with CJ Stroud coming in here, I think since really 2020, any opposing quarterback that was even halfway decent, I would have been saying they better have a great game on offense. And I'm sure somewhere Kirk was watching that game going, yeah, really? Really? That's the defense you're giving Sam Darnold, huh? That's my theory on that, man.
It felt, and this is going to sound maybe a little crazy, but it felt like it looked like a Brian Flores defense. This is what he's been doing. It's what he did when he was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. We saw some of that type of stuff when he was on the staff for the New England Patriots, when they were going to Super Bowls and winning Super Bowls, where you have a game plan and you go out and you execute it, and it becomes a situation where quarterbacks have to really read what they're seeing. And Flores is so good at designing and creating confusion for a quarterback, where he can't just go off that first read and make that throw. He's got to hang in there in the pocket for a long time and hope that something goes wrong in the coverage, and then he can kind of expose it. And I mean, that's just a testament to Brian Flores being able to dial up things on the defensive side, where you don't know if a blitz is coming. You don't know what kind of coverage you're going to see in the secondary. And then to your point about just having veteran players that understand how to play this game defensively, guys just know where they have to be. They know what they have to do. It's kind of like what year was that with the Bill Belichick, do your job, where every guy on the defense has their job. They know exactly what they're supposed to do. They don't try to do anything more than that. And it feels like you're starting to see that characteristic happen in this defense too.
I've always felt also, Manny, that from a coaching perspective, we always want coaches to just make whatever they have for talent the best. I mean, just take whatever you've got and make it great, because you're a coach and you're the genius and you can turn anything into anything. But I think with someone like Brian Flores, he's already really great at his job. And he can make a little bit better of a defense than it was talent-wise last year and deserve credit for that. But with this year, the more you give Brian Flores, the more he can do. And think about it this way. You can't run the triangle offense and win championships without Jordan and Kobe. If Phil Jackson's running that with the Charlotte Bobcats, then he's probably not getting the same results, right? But for that team, those teams, those offenses, it's brilliant and it's perfect and it maximizes everything they can do. You can only get these results if Stephon Gilmore is all over their best wide receivers. I thought he had a terrific game yesterday. And if Harrison Smith is in throwing lanes because he's identifying stuff that the 49ers are trying to do. There were several times where I saw, and there's no stat for this, Brock Purdy, look, oh, Harrison Smith is there. I got to look somewhere else. And Jonathan Grenard on third downs, getting at his feet, getting those pressures. Andrew Van Ginkel and not knowing where he's going to be on every play. But that you can't just make DJ Wanham into Andrew Van Ginkel, right? You had to play DJ Wanham into his capabilities. So last year, what he was trying to do was just, all right, we've got a couple 4-3 defensive ends. Let's sort of keep them in their positions and work everybody else with the blitzes. But now you don't have to keep one of your 4-3 because it's a 3-4 outside linebacker. You don't have to keep Van Ginkel there. You can put him wherever you want. And now Patrick Jones can kind of just do his thing over there as opposed to Patrick Jones trying to do everything as he was last year after Wanham got hurt. So I think it's kind of the two things playing off each other. Also, the front office working well with the coaching staff to put together the roster to be able to do that. I mean, getting the groceries that they need to cook their meal is very important. The Pollock 34 says, I don't know how good we are record-wise. It's a long season, but the team is scrappy and tough. The mentality of this team, Manny, maybe it's just 2-0. I don't know. Is it 2-0 brain? Am I 2-0 pilled? The way Kevin O'Connell and Flores lead this team with the players who have done this before, they have sample sizes of being these guys before. I think what he's saying about the team being tough is very, very real, and it showed against the 49ers.
Yeah, I mean, how many times just in it sound like I'm picking on the former quarterback here, but how many times did we see in the previous 6 years something go wrong? I kind of hinted at this earlier. Something go wrong or the team gets off to a bad start and they just can't. It's just a sign of what kind of day it's going to be. You know, I don't know if, you know, if that's Kirk Cousins throwing that interception to Fred Warner, I don't know how the Vikings recover from that in years past. You know what I mean? But even Sam Darnold himself, you know, it was a great play by Warner, but it was also kind of a bad play by Darnold as well. And it didn't really faze him. He just came back out and, you know, he still continued to play well after that. And I think that goes into the toughness side of things. And I mean, scrappy, the funny thing is I usually associate scrappy teams with teams that are kind of like lesser in talent and they just kind of, they overachieve a little bit, you know, maybe like the Minnesota Wild in 2003, getting to the conference finals, you know, with guys like, you know, and over the hill, Cliff Ronning and some other, you know, guys that they, you know, Richard Park and some of these other guys. But this is a team, this is also a team that has the best wide receiver in the NFL, two of the best tackles, offensive tackles in the league, and really, really, really good football players on the defensive side as well. So they're scrappy from the standpoint of they can kind of hang in there when things go wrong. But this is also, I think, maybe just like the national media and sort of the cynicism amongst the Vikings fan base, you just maybe underestimated how good a football team that this can actually be.
Well, and, you know, I think that you and I were in a very similar space coming into the season, and we're going to find out in just a minute when you pick the schedule, whether you are in a different mind space now. And I want to get to a few more of these comments, but you're going to go through every game. But neither one of us were super down on this. The wild card was just always the quarterback. And when you talk about the resilience and, I mean, scrappiness is not how I initially thought of a Kevin O'Connell team because Ed Donatel was his defensive coordinator. Now I do because Brian Flores is his defensive coordinator. And boy, you talk about scrappy, like a Blake Cashman and Jonathan Grenard. These guys are scrappy. Like they brought in dudes who are like that. And Josh Metellus is someone who Flores identified as being a great talent. And we just sort of last year went like, oh, wow, I guess this is happening. But now it's, this is really him. He's a really significant playmaker who was on the bench on special teams in years past. And now he's here because they identified him as that scrappy type of player. Metellus is probably, if we're picking all scrappy players, I think he's the scrappiest because he's not that big and they put him at linebacker all the time. And he just has to fight with guys up front he's guarding tight ends. He got thrown down by Trent Williams on a play when he tried to blitz and Trent just went boom. And he got back up and kept going. But I also think, Manny, when you talk about those years past, 2020, 2021, a lot of close games at the end that they just let melt away. It's just been different under Kevin O'Connell. That doesn't mean that Nick Mullins was going to win all the one-score games or Josh Dobbs was going to win all the one-score games. But I think that the coach's vibe and the coach's approach and this never say die. We had the biggest comeback in NFL history, the largest point total comeback in NFL history against Indianapolis a couple of years ago. I mean, when we've got a sample of this happening, it's kind of like how, do you remember, and you mentioned Cliff Ronning, so I'll just go tit for tat with you here. Do you remember when the Chiefs under Marty Schottenheimer would never turn the ball over? They were at the top 3 or 4 every single year at not turning the ball over with Marty Schottenheimer. And eventually, okay, turnovers can be random, but eventually you go, all right, coaching has something to do with this. And 2022 was very random in a lot of ways, but also Kirk Cousins' confidence in those big situations was different. Sam Darnold, I asked Kevin O'Connell this question today. He was not playing along with it, but I asked him anyway, because I think this. Throwing a 97-yard pass from the goal line, going forward on 4th down, that drive where they go 14 plays and they kill the clock and they get a field goal that puts the game away, and it's 3rd down, and Sam Darnold's dropping straight back and firing a bullet to a number 3 wide receiver. I mean, these are things that the coach is showing real belief in his quarterback. He is not running the football and punting Mike Zimmer and Kirk Cousins in 2019. That has to matter, man.
It does. It 100% matters. And it's, when teams make coaching changes, we've certainly seen this over the years with the Vikings, where they typically will go with the opposite of what the previous head coach was. And, Kevin O'Connell came in 2.5 years ago, with just a complete different mentality, a completely different approach from what this team had been, I don't want to say just dealing with, because they did have some success under Mike Zimmer. But for 8 years, it was Mike Zimmer was there was this sort of tough, hard-nosed, tough love type of approach. And, I think just over time that can kind of wear thin on guys. And, when you're not having success because you don't have the same kind of talent that you had in 2017 to have the best defense in the league, you're just not going to win that many games. And then that sort of, what did Eric Kendricks say? The fear-based, type of mentality. It just wears thin on people. And so when you bring in a guy that's a little bit more upbeat, a little bit more positive, a little bit more uplifting, it can have a huge difference. And I think, some of the things that we saw certainly in 2022, and even last year when like Josh Dobbs first came on and they were just finding ways to win those games, and he had the one game against the Saints where he played really, really well. Like, if that was Mike Zimmer coaching that team in that particular circumstance where Cousins goes down with the injury, I just don't think that even that Saints game with Dobbs playing really well, I don't know if they win that game if it's Mike Zimmer. I think that really speaks to what Kevin O'Connell has done. And these first 2 games, it just really feels like now even in year 3 with Kevin O'Connell, this team is starting to really take on the identity of their head coach. They're really starting to represent what their head coach is all about. And when you have that, you're just more likely to have some success.
Yeah, I think that Zimmer's approach affected certain people. It affected Kirk Cousins for one.
Yep.
And he had, in 2019, he did have his best statistical year, but they really pared things down for him. And that was Stefanski and Kubiak really cooking. But there were games, and I remember Kansas City was one against Matt Moore, the Matt Moore game, where he's got a chance to potentially go win that game. And he checks it down to CJ Ham on 3rd down or something. And you just went, I don't think this guy believes that he can go put the dagger in a team. And then he was doing that more often. Not to say he completely changed as a quarterback, but you felt that confidence to do that, to put it on his shoulders, to throw 40 passes in a game and go win it for them under Kevin O'Connell. And I also think that Zimmer affected younger players significantly in those bigger moments who are terrified to make a mistake. And there's not a lot of younger players on this roster right now, which helps Kevin O'Connell. But the ones that they have relied upon, I don't know that they have had that same fear. Like Jalen Naylor making that play. I mean, that is a huge, huge catch. And Naylor played so confidently yesterday. And that's been Kevin O'Connell time and time and time again saying, I believe in this guy. He could do it. All he's got to do is get his body right and be healthy and get out there. And I know it. And eventually I do think, and I don't need every coach to just tell everybody that everything is beautiful and rainbows and whatever. But when you have a player who could go one way or the other, they're good enough to do it, but they need somebody to just say you can do it. O'Connell is always there to be that guy, and that might be the case for Sam Darnold. But this whole conversation will be moot if Sam Darnold falls apart from what he's done over these first couple weeks. John says, as a Vikings fan, I'm predisposed to fearing falling in love with the team. I need the first quarter of the season before I can believe. Totally fair. They've got 2 more difficult games to go, but even if they lose them just in the first quarter-ish, I guess it's the first 4 games and about 26 minutes into the Jets game when you'll know through the first quarter of the season, now that there's 17 games. 17 game math jokes, anybody? No? Okay. Troken says, potential playoff team need a few more games to justify playoff contender. They always outplay the 49ers for some reason. In Minnesota, it is a weird thing, Manny, and the 49ers, to their credit, had played, I believe, on Monday Night Football. Is that right? And so they had the short week. They had to go on the road. Those were definitely factors in this game, I think, for the Vikings, but you don't have to apologize for outplaying one of the best teams in the league and at your home building. That was what you would do, is completely outplay them if you're going to be a really good team. So why don't we, before we answer some more questions, why don't we have you pick this schedule? I got requests for this. People were asking for it. I want to hear what Manny thinks the schedule is going to be. And I said, well, tune in at 7:55 Central Time, Prime Meridian. You'll find out. So why don't we do this, Manny? The Vikings start this conversation at 2-0, and they will face the Houston Texans at home September 22nd this Sunday. What do you think? Win or loss?
I will call that. Boy, this is hard. This is actually hard.
Way harder now than it was last week. Last week we just kind of picked all the obvious ones.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is I had yesterday's game down as a loss when we did this last week. And I still, despite that, I still have this team ending up at 10-7. I think the last time I picked the schedule. So I will call this a
Manny, there's a lot more games. You're going to have to decide.
I know.
You can't do this for every game.
I know. I'll call it a win.
Okay. I'll just do the ad reads in between your picks.
It's a hard one to pick, man.
3-0. You're thinking the Minnesota Vikings start this season 3-0. Okay. 3-0. Well, now they're going to Lambeau Field, where somehow Malik Willis runs Air Force's offense and is very dangerous. Are they 4-0? Manny, are you doing this? Are you going to say they're going to start the season 4-0?
I'll say they're 4-0.
Oh my! It
wouldn't be the first time we've seen it.
No, my first year, 2016. My first year, they were 5-0, and Peter King wrote an article. Not to make fun of him, he's the best. Every football writer's hero is Peter King. But Peter King wrote an article that Sam Bradford was the MVP of the league through the first 5 games. And we were just talking like, man, this team, Super Bowl contenders, everything else. And then the offensive line fell apart. And we all know where the sadness train went after that. And Zimmer's eyeball fell apart and many other things. Norv watched the rest of that from home. So 4-0 headed to London against the Jets. Are you going to go 5-0, Manny, to start this season?
This is where I think they stumble.
Okay.
This is where I think they stumble. The Jets, I'm still not even really sure like how good the Jets are. I mean, because even yesterday against the Titans, it was just kind of, and again, I will get another Will Levis cheap shot in here at some point during this episode. I'll find a way to mix it in. Because I've been kind of picking on Will Levis all season. But yeah, I think this is where they stumble. It's a London game, kind of a weird start time against a team that is talented. So I'll call this a loss.
Okay, so 4-1, rather than completely losing your mind. The Lions come here. I'm not downplaying the Lions after they lost the game yesterday. Not too concerned about that. Still think it's a great team. But when you're a great team, every single loss is going to be treated like the end of the world. Do you feel differently, Manny? The Vikings come out of that bye. TJ Hawkinson, I am guessing, will be back on this team when they return from the bye at 4-1. So will they go to 5-1?
I will call this a loss as well. Because I'm on board with you as far as the Lions. I'm not panicking on them after yesterday. Yesterday, it does kind of raise some eyebrows a little bit, but I still think the Lions are the best team in the division right now, and so I'll call this a loss.
Oh,
it'll be close. It'll be close.
4-2, panic sets in, and they need to get right going out to Los Angeles, which I didn't see that game yesterday, Manny. What the freak happened? What? Hey, I want to say one thing. I've been on Kyler's side. I've thought that Kyler was really badly coached previously. And I wanted to see what Jonathan Gannon, that offense there, it's run by a guy who used to work for the Vikings, Drew Petzing. I interviewed him a handful of times. Really sharp guy. I think he went to Harvard or something, but a really, really sharp guy. And I think that's going to work for them, for Arizona. But the Rams, though, what? Huh? The Rams can't be that bad.
They might not be that bad, but I will call this a win
Okay.
because I think the Vikings will maybe bring enough fans out there to Los Angeles. It always, when the Rams are playing at SoFi Stadium, it always seems like a road game for them.
Oh, yeah.
Because the opposing team brings in a lot of fans. So I'll call that a win.
I'll tell you, at one point, we would have been talking about if they get through the first 7 games at 3-4, what a victory that would be. You have them at 5-2, Manny. This man, is there a cup of purple anything next to you that you can drink right now? A little soda, a little Kool-Aid, something purple, a grape you can eat, because you are on the train right now. But a 5-2 start would be incredible as they go back home on November 3rd to face Anthony Richardson and the Colts, who I do not know what to make of. They were good in the first week and very, very bad against the Packers. Got to be concerned about that defense. Also, it's, I think, going to be very up and down for Anthony Richardson is what we're going to see from him. But at 5-2 coming home to play the Colts.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about Brian Flores just kind of licking his chops with Anthony Richardson. And I'm still high on Anthony Richardson. I still think he has a chance to be really good. I think it's just probably going to take some time and some more development with him. He was pretty bad yesterday.
Very bad. Yep. Very bad.
He was pretty damn bad yesterday. So I will call this a win for the Vikings.
6-2 Minnesota Vikings. This is why we do this. This is so much fun. If they lose next week, your record's going to be totally different.
It is. Yeah.
Jags. Whoa, man. Jags. Trevor Lawrence saying we suck right now. Doug Peterson has to be on the hot seat. So you're bringing the 6-2 Vikings down to Jacksonville, where Matt Asiata was stuffed at the goal line numerous times the last time they were down there, but they still beat the Jaguars in a very forgettable football game, 2016.
I don't think, if my memory serves me correctly, I don't think the Vikings have ever lost to the Jaguars.
Any game?
Ever. I don't think they've ever lost to the Jaguars.
It's very possible.
I remember the season opener in 2012, because that was Adrian's first game back after the ACL. Yeah, I'll call that a win. Jacksonville just doesn't look. They just don't look right, and I'm not sure. I thought Doug Peterson was going to be a good fit down there, but it might just not be happening for them.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a bad fit or if Trevor Lawrence is just overrated or what. I mean, we keep making apologies for him, but at some point you get past that and just say, I don't know. They drafted a receiver for him. They haven't done a whole lot, but this should be a game that we're looking at as a win, moving the Vikings to now 7-2. And now they're going to play Will Levis, which I can imagine hysterical things happening between Brian Flores and Will Levis. So are they going to 8? Man, did you have the Minnesota Vikings at 8-2?
Well, my question is, and this is just me, this is me going into turbo snark mode with Will Levis. Will Will Levis even be playing by then?
I know. I
mean, because Brian Callahan was absolutely pissed at him after that dumbass play that he made yesterday. And the press conference afterwards was great because they asked him like what he said, and he said,
yes.
yeah, it was on camera. I think you guys saw it. Yeah, this is they're going to go to 8-2. I don't think the Titans are very good.
I don't have the comment section far enough down to react. Maybe you can see what people are saying. Are people saying you're insane? Because I think you've reached almost completely.
It's crazy because but here's the thing: when we picked the schedule before, I had them losing to the Niners. I had them losing to the Jets. I think I had them beating Houston, but this was going to be a kind of a, and I think I had them losing to Green Bay too, but that was with the thought that Jordan Love was going to be healthy. So, and now we're getting into the part of the schedule where I thought, oh yeah, this is where they're going to start racking up some wins. So
I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying if it goes this way, this is going to be, this is just how you have to operate because we don't have another game until next week. But I was even talking with the wife tonight about like, wait, if Darnold does lead them to 12 wins, what would we do? How would we even approach that subject? How would we even talk about it? Is like, should they do a Jeff George to Culpepper thing? Should they give him a contract? But then how are you going to keep other people? I'm already there. And here's you picking them now to start the season 8-2. They go to the House of Horrors in Chicago, but I also want to have, after you pick this schedule, a conversation about young quarterbacks in the NFL. Vikings at Bears at Soldier Field, November 24th, as they go as one of the best teams in the NFC.
Well, this is where I'm going to put them down as a loss, even though like Caleb Williams looks terrible right now. You kind of hinted at this about a week or so ago that like, what is Caleb Williams going to look like by then? I mean, this is week 12. This is 2.5 months from now. So I'm going to call this a loss because it's Soldier Field. And, it's possible that Caleb Williams is playing better by then.
And I always think it's fair to just split the division games, even if other teams are bad. Like they have lost to the, 10-1 Detroit Lions. Weird things happen in your division. So they're 8-3 now, playing the Cardinals at home on December 1st.
I'll call this a loss as well.
Oh, a surprise loss, maybe. That Cardinals team might suddenly be good.
That's what has me thinking this is that, maybe the Cardinals are one of those teams that kind of pop up and end up winning 10 games this year and they're in contention for the playoffs. You've got Marvin Harrison Jr. who's starting to emerge. I'm with you on Kyler Murray. I think he's, I think some things have been kind of working against him with the injuries and, just having Cliff Kingsbury as your head coach is just like not good at all. I kind of like what the Cardinals are doing, and I could see this being a loss, even albeit at home.
Okay, so once again, back-to-back losses hitting a little bit of, is this team a fraud? But then they face the Falcons. I don't have the game on. How's that going? Do you have the game on?
I saw a comment that I don't have the game on either. I saw a comment that Kirk threw a pick, though.
Oh, really? Okay.
So,
yeah, I got a text that said Kirk looks very bad. But I was trying to concentrate on this show. It's 3-0 Falcons right now in the second quarter. So I guess it hasn't been going too terribly, but they're going to play the Falcons at home 8-4. I don't know if Kirk Cousins is playing quarterback at this point. But how do you think that one plays out?
I think even if it's Michael Penix by then, I will put this down as a win. Because if it's Penix, I could see Brian Flores still making some things kind of challenging for him being a rookie. So, and it's at home as well. So I'll put that down as a win.
Okay, 9-4, and then facing the Bears at home. I assume you're going to go with a win there for 10-4.
Yep.
At we just talked about the Bears, so we can go to Seattle at 10-4. Whew.
I'll put this down as a loss. The last time we picked the schedule, I had it as a loss. It's because Seattle's just a weird place for the Vikings to play. There's been a lot more bad things happening there to the Vikings than good. And, and I think Seattle's formidable. I don't think that they're not a great team, but they've got some good players. And so I'll put that down as a loss.
All right. So 10-5 with 2 games to go, Packers and Lions. What happens in these final 2 games as in your version? The Vikings are 10-5, battling for playoff position and supremacy in the NFC.
I will call this a win at home against Green Bay. Yes. Or no.
You're going to go loss.
I'm going to go loss here.
Okay.
Because Jordan Love will be back.
Okay.
And I think he'll be playing better. And I'll put this down as a loss.
So that puts them at 10-6 going to Detroit.
And last time we picked the schedule, I had this as a win because I had the Lions already having the division secured and playing for nothing. And I'll keep that because I think by then the Lions will have found their groove. And, I still think the Lions have a chance to be one of the top 2 seeds in the conference. And so I think they'll be in position by then, playing for not much. And the Vikings will, competing for a specific spot in the playoffs, I think we'll come away with a win. So I got them at 11-6.
I would love feedback from people in the comment section. I love this bit. I love doing this every Monday, going through and just seeing how much it changes. I'm sorry. What did you say? It was a loss. So 10-7 or are you saying a win? 11-6.
It's a win. 11-6.
It's a win. 11-6. Okay. That's what I thought you said, but then my brain malfunctioned because I was thinking about the ad read that I haven't done yet. But 11-6 would be a very good situation for a certain coach who needs a contract extension. I think.
Yep.
And at that point, so I want to make a point about the schedule, but I really can't let it go much farther without mentioning US Cellular. So we have to do that. US Cellular, folks, sponsor of the show, very important to the show continuing to happen. Notice that the way we use our phones has gotten ironic. We try to put our phones down for dinner, but the menu is on a QR code. That is ironic. We hit like on social media posts that we don't actually like, which is why US Cellular created Us Mode to help us reconnect with each other and use our phones less. Ironically, a phone company wanting people to use their phones less is ironic. Let's find us again with Us Mode from US Cellular. Visit uscellular.com/built-for-us to get started. And Underdog Fantasy, by the way, a big sponsor of the show. You want to use the promo code PURPLE. And here's the cool thing about Underdog Fantasy. They have different promotions happening every single day in September. So you go over to Underdog Fantasy. It is a new promotion every single day. You get free picks from NFL players. CD Lamb is giving you his free pick of the week. You get the underdogs on Saturday. Lots going on over at Underdog Fantasy. You want to go over there, check them out. We love the pick'ems. We did them on Thursday. We're going to do them every week where you pick between 2 and 8 stats of your favorite players, go 5 for 5, and you can win 20 times your money. So sign up with the promo code PURPLE and claim your special pick and first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 bonus cash. Promo code PURPLE. Use it. Must be 18 or older. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. Let me make this point about the schedule, Manny. I'm gonna speed run this point. Okay. The Texans are who we thought they were. The Packers are probably still pretty good. Jets might be okay. Lions are probably fine. Rams are probably okay. When you get to the middle part of the season, Colts are worse than we thought. Jaguars are worse than we thought. Titans are just bad. Bears are probably worse than we thought. Cardinals are okay. Falcons are worse than we thought. Seattle is probably quite good. And then we're back to the division games. There's a lot of teams in there that aren't as good as we thought they were going to be. And I think that's a point when you pick the schedule that you sound like a lunatic, but yet maybe not when you consider how many teams on that schedule, especially I think Chicago, have not been what they expected to be, and Atlanta with Kirk at this point, and that's why I just fundamentally reject strength of schedule until we get into the season. Your strength of schedule at 2 games in is way different than you thought it was going to be even just 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, and so many of these games too, especially like in the middle of the schedule, some of these games are just like swing games where you just don't really, you can kind of look at, what you've recently seen from these teams and just think, okay, well, I can look at that game at the Rams and see the Rams playing like garbage yesterday and think, oh yeah, that's, it's a road home game for the Rams because they don't, nobody comes to their games, and they look terrible yesterday. They're going to be a mess. But what if like Matthew Stafford and that offense get hot between now and then, and they're, what if they're like 4-3 or 5-2 or something at that point? Then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that might actually be a loss. So it's just one of those things where you do have to kind of let these games play out. I mean, picking the schedule, it's still fun. It's still just, it's still exciting, but you just have to kind of let this season play out before you really have an idea of, not just with the Vikings, of how good really any of these teams are. And that's why it's just exciting to really kind of see, all of these teams, get a look at them and just see how things sort of materialize over the course of the season.
I want to hear you talk about young quarterbacks, Manny. I'm not even going to set this one up. I just want to get your reaction over what happened with Bryce Young, Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, and the struggles of teams around the league. Whereas Darnold, Mayfield, and Geno Smith are all playing really well. What do you think about that?
I think it kind of shows that occasionally you will have a young quarterback step in as a rookie, like a CJ Stroud last year, like Matt Ryan did in 2008. Matt Ryan and Joe Flacco in 2008. Occasionally you will get guys like that come in right away as rookies and they play really well and they impress everybody. But most of the time, when you throw these kids out there, what we've seen from those young quarterbacks that you just listed, that's going to be the norm, because this game is so much of a step up from the college game, that to ask these guys and to expect that these guys are going to just step in day one, week one, and just light the league on fire is just, I mean, you're just asking way too much of these guys. And we talked about in the offseason, like Caleb Williams, just from what we saw from him last year at USC, where he was just trying to do too much. I looked at him and thought, okay, the talent is there. He's going to be the first guy taken in the draft, but does he need to be out there right away? Probably not. And we're seeing now early on that is kind of proving to be true. Now, again, like if he continues to play by week 12 when the Vikings go to Chicago, he might be playing better, and that might be a tougher game for the Vikings. But these guys, throwing them out there right now early on when they might not be ready, it's kind of proving the point that you don't have to throw these guys out there right away. And we've seen some of the greatest quarterbacks to play this game. Many of them sat for a year. Tom Brady, the greatest ever, sat for a year. He, the way he came into his job was unconventional. Obviously, it was because of an injury to the guy in front of him, but he still sat for that first year. Patrick Mahomes sat for that first year in 2017. And then when he started in week 17 in Denver in a game that meant nothing for the Chiefs, he didn't really play very well. You know what I mean? And then he turned around his first year as a starter the next year and won the league MVP, and the rest is history. But a lot of these guys, man, they're just not ready to go right away. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're all going to fail, but I think what we're seeing now is just I think it's really helpful that if you're going to draft a young quarterback, you can bring in a veteran that can be ready to go week one. So where you're not forced to put that young guy in, it's going to bode better for him.
I want to shout out Gerard Mayo here for New England.
Yep.
And everybody's saying Oh, well, Drake May outplayed Jacoby Brissett in training camp, and he had a better preseason. And Gerard Mayo even said, you know what, you guys are right. People wrote that, and he said, yeah, you're right. Yep, he did. And I don't care. I'm starting Jacoby Brissett because I looked at a little bit of that game just out of curiosity. The offensive line for the Patriots was horrible. And the offensive line for the Bears is not good enough to help a quarterback who doesn't know where to go with the football yet. And what I was concerned about with Caleb Williams was really his confidence, because when he got beat up at USC, he didn't take it well. He did not, I think, handle it. And you saw, I was very concerned with this clip. If I'm in Chicago, I guess for you fans, you're very excited by this. But when they showed him on the sideline, they're losing the game, but it's not over. And he's on the sideline sitting on the bench like, he did that at USC. Dude, you can't do that. This is the NFL. You always have a chance. And he had a chance at the end and completely blew it. Didn't look like he knew where to throw the ball at the end of the game. His receivers are looking back going, bro, where are you? That's not the play. What are you talking about? This is a quintessential guy who shouldn't play the first year. And the supporting cast that he was supposed to have, Roma Dunze and Keenan Allen, they're not even playing. And the offensive line is just getting destroyed. I think around the league, defensive lines and defenses are so far ahead of offensive lines, just in general, that a serviceable performance by the Vikings yesterday looks actually great. Darnold wasn't getting killed all the time. I think over the last few years, there's been a lot of dudes who came into the league defensively who are very dangerous, including Will Anderson, but also, even going back a couple of years where it's like they don't leave the league and then more come in. Like Kayvon Thibodeau joins the New York Giants. Like these players just keep showing up, and there's more and more of them. And then there's Brian Flores isn't the only one messing with quarterbacks. There's all sorts of dudes who are running stuff where it's not a traditional, you stand there in your 4-3 base. It's extra bodies on the field, like hybrid players. It's blitzes coming from all over the place. It's mixing coverages. It's pattern matching more than they've ever done before with cornerbacks that was kind of brought over from some of the Nick Saban stuff. This is so complicated. And when you throw these guys in there when they can't have enough blocking, then there's no system and there's no answer and there's no way to let them diagnose that, because if they make a mistake in seeing it, which is why Andy Dalton will probably go into Carolina and play fine, because he'll get rid of the football. That's always his biggest thing. Caleb Williams isn't getting rid of the football. He's just getting killed. And you see with Bryce Young there, I saw a couple of clips where he's just not getting rid of the ball. And then what happens is the eyes go from downfield to down here, looking at the rush. Once that happens, it is over. And now the guy is destroyed because everybody's talking about him. ESPN, every debate show, everywhere across social media, there is no patience. The draft industry is so enormous that every guy is dubbed generational talent, and you're just supposed to walk in here and be Andrew Luck, and it's just not possible. It's not realistic, and there would be horrible busts no matter what. The game is that hard. But I think what ends up happening is you have owners who are forcing draft picks.
Yep.
David Tepper, Carolina, no question about that. Then you're saying, why aren't you playing that guy? You drafted him. You have to play him. So, of course, okay, the coaches will try. We'll work with it. You have egomaniac coaches like Sean Payton, who thinks, I better play the guy I drafted because I drafted him and he's got to go be a star, even though I bet Jared Stidham would probably play better than Bo Nix. They don't have a running game. They don't have receivers. They don't have anything in Denver. They're a terrible team. And so this is one thing with the Vikings, where when you look forward, you go, assuming that Sam Darnold doesn't do what you just said and go 11-6 and win deep in the playoffs, assuming that he doesn't do that, and we'll get to that conversation if we actually start going that way. But assuming everything is going over to JJ McCarthy next year, he'll have a year where he didn't have to play and had no pressure and could just learn. He will have two of the best offensive tackles, two of the best wide receivers, one of the best tight ends, and a coach who knows what he's doing with offensive scheme. And now even a third wide receiver in Jalen Naylor.
And a defense.
Getting there, and a defense and potentially a running game if they stick with Chandler going forward. This is a Dak Prescott into Dallas type of situation that the Vikings are going to give. Teams really need to build the rest of their franchise first. And you know what I'm curious about? will we see the return of the journeyman quarterback? The Gus Frerotte, what Teddy Bridgewater started to be, the Andy Dalton, instead of being benched, is the starting quarterback. Will owners figure this out? Will the football men just keep saying, you can't keep doing this to us and destroying young lives here? You've got to give us a chance to build up a full team around a journeyman quarterback before we could just go to this draft pick.
Yeah. I mean, I just think, to me, I just feel like if you are a franchise and you are going to draft a young quarterback, if you're going to trade up draft capital to move up 10 spots to take him in the top 5 somewhere, if you're really going to do all of this and invest into a young guy, you have to do everything in your power to invest into making sure that that guy is as successful as humanly possible. And in a lot of cases with these guys, that means not throwing them out there into the wolves on day one. And to your point about journeyman quarterbacks, you got to kind of wonder if a guy like Sam Darnold, if this is, as he gets, he's 27 years old now, if he 26, 27, when he gets into his 30s because if he continues to play well, somebody will give him a nice contract and he'll probably play through that. But once he gets to be kind of in his 30s, you kind of wonder, okay, is Sam Darnold going to be kind of a journeyman guy that plays for a couple of different teams to be just that bridge guy, kind of what he is right now for the Vikings, a bridge guy that steps in and doesn't, he takes a lot of pressure off of that young quarterback that gets drafted. To me, unless you are for sure that you've got Andrew Luck or Matt Ryan or, one of those guys that can step in right away and CJ Stroud, if you're going to put your quarterback in on day one like that, you better make sure you have one of those guys. And the tough thing too, Coller, is I don't know how you even really know for sure if you have that guy.
Yep.
I mean, the Texans, in a lot of ways, I mean, DeMeco Ryans in that front office, they look like geniuses because CJ Stroud came in right away as a rookie and played well, led them to the playoffs and won a playoff game. But that could have gone a completely different direction if he wasn't ready to go. And in a lot of cases, those guys are not ready to go. And that could have been a disaster for them last year by starting him week 1 like that. It worked out great for them, but that is not the norm. And I just wish that more teams would realize that is not the norm. And I think we'll start seeing a lot more of these guys, I think, have some success. We're still going to your point, we're still going to have some guys that just don't have it. Guys like Christian Ponder who just don't have it at all. But I just, as a fan of the sport, I just want to see a lot more of these teams really invest fully into the guys that they're using these high draft picks on and doing whatever they can to make sure these guys are as successful as possible.
And I think that there's a forest and trees issue when it comes to these teams and the rookie quarterback contract, because of course, yes, you have to take advantage of the rookie quarterback contract. But if you consider that you can extend the guy and keep relatively low salary cap hits for about 6 years, if you do it right with the cap, and the 5th and 6th year can be pretty manageable, then it explodes, then it becomes a Dak situation, whatever. But that's a much bigger window than, oh my gosh, he's got to get in there and start playing right away. If he's not ready to win, it doesn't do you any good and get you fired anyway. If Caleb Williams wins 3 games this year, then Matt Eberflus is not coming back next year. And they're going to hire a coach and say, no, this is the guy. Just like Bryce Young. This is the guy for Dave Canales. You're going to save Bryce Young. 2 games in, he's benching him. I'm like, okay. I mean, but their offensive line is still tough. I think actually with Bryce Young, he might just be irredeemably bad. He's so small. And that's the other thing too, that it's not just all quarterbacks. It's, are you physically ready? And someone like Josh Allen could just sort of figure it out when he came in 2018, but even they didn't throw him in the first week. Even he had a couple of weeks where they threw 40 interceptions with Nathan Peterman, and then they put him in there. But okay, he's a physical freak. All right, he could go in. CJ Stroud, I think, is a mental freak. All right, he can go in. And they did a lot to help him last year with a lot of play action stuff and everything else. But Bryce Young is 5'10", And the other part of it too is, and I think this plays in, there's desperation for teams to draft quarterback. And sometimes they reach on guys that aren't actually first round picks. That might be Bo Nix's thing. I don't know. I'm not willing to declare after 2 weeks. That would be ridiculous with anybody, no matter even if they were an older quarterback. But I think there's also that's Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett wasn't a first round talent. At the same time, they gave him a bad offensive coordinator. He didn't have great offensive line. They didn't have a great running game. And then, he fails. So I don't know, Manny, it's one of the hardest things to solve in sports, but I think the landscape is the hardest that it's ever been for young quarterbacks. And that even means when you could rip the quarterback's head off and beat him with it and it wasn't a penalty. But the complexity of what they're doing now, the data that they have to go up against the other teams and know their tendencies and everything else, and the lack of great offensive line play, I think is really played into this. There's not 32 teams worth of good offensive linemen. Let's answer one more question before you go. And I'm going to hang around for another half hour or so and answer your questions because we've gotten behind in this. I just love that conversation. And also just the bottom line is the Vikings did this right. And the Vikings can spend $20 million on a right guard next year. Ooh, a right guard. Ty says we should curb our enthusiasm on one of my favorite shows, on Darnold. Remember Josh Dobbs mania? Oh, we remember. Manny's he loves Tennessee. He remembers. Darnold looks far more sustainable, but give coordinators a few weeks. That said, I'm excited. I don't think that we should talk about the two guys as being connected at all. But the real question, you picked them to be 11-6.
Yeah.
Because you had a lot of fun watching football yesterday and you were ready to pick them 11-6. How sustainable is Sam Darnold, man?
I think it's fairly sustainable. And the reason why, and we've talked about this, the reason why I think it's a little more sustainable is because of the physical talent, the physical skills that are there. I mean, the 97-yard touchdown, like, I'm not even sure Kirk Cousins could make that type of a throw, just to sort of kind of flip that ball up there like that and have it go 60 yards and land right into Justin Jefferson's breadbasket. Like that's the type of stuff. And then you see the ability to kind of run right before halftime. He has that long scramble and it slides right before the field goal. There's just like little things that he can do, I think, that can kind of make a difference that we haven't seen for the previous 6 seasons. And I think that's going to be kind of the difference. Now, I picked him to be 11-6 based off of mostly yesterday. Sam Darnold's going to have a clunker. He's going to have a game probably where he throws like 3 picks and he's awful. And then everybody's going to be like, oh, that's the Sam Darnold that we know. But I think just overall, the infrastructure that's in place, the head coach that's here, and I think just, again, I don't think people are talking enough about the fact that he got to spend a year in San Francisco, just kind of observing Brock Purdy on a team that, went all the way to the Super Bowl. So it's not like it was a 7-10 team that was done by early January. They went deep all the way into February. And it was just, he was just around an environment that's competent. And he seems like he's around an environment that's competent now too. And he's actually getting a chance to play. So I think it's sustainable. Listen, nobody's putting him in the MVP conversation, certainly. But I think that there's enough on this team to where I think he can have a really successful season.
I think the thing about, well, first of all, he's got like 110 quarterback rating right now. That would put him in MVP. So that's not that sustainable. Hitting 97-yard touchdowns is not that sustainable. But I think what your point is what's around him allows you to, when we're talking about curbing how violent the bad turns can be. And I really thought that Kevin O'Connell helped Kirk Cousins with that, because some of the Kirk Cousins bad games from the Zimmer era were atrocities. And I didn't feel like there were many atrocities. There were bad games, but I didn't feel like there were games where you just went, what, huh, what, where were you today, buddy? The 2019 losing to Chase Daniel game was just, okay, that was the worst game I've ever seen a quarterback play. And if you can curb the downs and you can win a game with the downs. The biggest thing for yesterday, though, that I thought with Sam Darnold and his confidence, and you want to keep it high, is that he made some pretty bad mistakes. We should make fun of him for throwing the ball backwards to Aaron Jones. Come on, buddy. What are we doing here? Just go down.
Yeah.
He made several really bad plays, and him running backwards into Nick Bosa instead of away from Nick Bosa. Like, Sam, there's 20 yards that way. Run that way. Don't run back that way. And yet the biggest moment comes in and he delivers the best pass of the day. Probably, 97-yard touchdowns, best pass of the day. Second best pass of the day to Jalen Nailor in the biggest moment. He converts to Brandon Powell in the biggest moment in a play that had to be very simple for him, where he looked at his first read and he said, nope, it's not there. I'm going to go to Brandon Powell underneath, first down, game over. Right. And stuff like that to come back from makes me think that he can keep doing it. Not that I think he's going to win the MVP, but he can keep winning. But I also kind of thought that about Josh Dobbs. I didn't think he would win. I thought that they would be in the playoff race a little bit more. I didn't think he was going to get benched right away. And that maybe he could we probably went way too far and said maybe he could be a bridge quarterback. So, Ty, we should always not go too crazy on this. But this team has not been 2-0. Well, they were 22. No, they weren't 2-0. They lost week 2, didn't they, to Philly? Yeah. So they haven't been 2-0 in a long time. When's the last time they were 2-0?
In fact, 16? I think at the end of the broadcast, Kevin Harlan actually said, 2016 was the last time they started out 2-0.
So embrace it. The game is going to be great. I made a joke that they should flex it to primetime, and then people took it very literally and explained all the rules to me. And I was like, I know, I just think it's going to be a good game. So Manny, you and I will talk on Thursday night. We'll have our underdog fantasy pick'ems, promo code purple. We'll have our pick'ems. Then we'll look at what stat lines we think are going to work out for the Vikings. And also, of course, we will hardcore preview that game. And this is quite a challenge for you. Favorite Texans is going to be, that's going to be interesting. I know you can do it. I know you can do it, Manny. So thanks for your time. I'm going to hang around and answer some more questions here because I've neglected the chat. And I appreciate everyone's patience. Also, if you leave a message but have to leave the live thing, I'll probably get to it. Go back and check it out later on the replay. So thanks, Manny. I'll see you on Thursday night. Appreciate it.
All right. Football.
Manny Hill, everybody. I love that conversation, though, about the young quarterbacks and the way that the Vikings are handling it. And to tell you the truth, Ty, to your question, we really don't know. And that's what makes this season so interesting, is just simply the fact that we really don't know. I think previously it's hard not to make things about what we've already saw in the past. Previously, we had a pretty good sense of where the train was going. Outside of 2022, we usually knew this is where it's headed. But with Sam Darnold, I don't know. If you said, I just went forward in time, just got back, and I discovered that Manny was right. They went 11-6, and now they have this really hard decision with Darnold. I'd be like, oh, I could see that. And if you came back and said, actually, dude, the wheels came off, and Darnold was terrible in the second half, and they lost to the Jaguars, it was really bad, I'd be like, oh, well, because every range of outcome is still on the table. And going into the season, that's what we said too, that there's so many ranges that there was a world where Sam Darnold looked like this. And then now that he does, like, what do we do with our hands? What do we make of this? Because the other side of it is, if it was a more established quarterback and they did have this game, then we would be saying, all right, well, we need to talk about this team as a very serious contender. And we don't know if we can truly do that yet until we get to the point where we've got a big enough sample size. And, that's quite a, what makes this entertaining. I think it's what makes this season so interesting. Pete says, still found a way to win without Addison and Hawkinson. Really interesting to think about what it might be when they both are back. That is a really good point, Pete. And something that I've thought about too, is that they went into this shorthanded already against San Francisco, and San Francisco didn't have McCaffrey, but their running back was phenomenal. So it's not like the reason that they lost was they didn't have Christian McCaffrey, when Jordan Mason is an absolute beast. Anybody would want that guy on their team. And being able to have other people step up, Ty Chandler and Jalen Naylor specifically, just shows you how many weapons they have. Even, hey, Johnny Munt made a nice catch for 6 yards along the sideline. I mean, everybody got involved in that game. It wasn't just one person or leaning on the stars. And when they are completely healthy with Hockenson, Addison, and Jefferson all together, then that's right about the time, by the way, that the schedule starts to open up. This is something that I started thinking about yesterday, and my brain was shooting all over the place and didn't really organize my thought. How valuable 2-0 is going forward, because when Manny starts his pick the schedule at 2-0, then you could even do the rest of the way a 500 record. It's how crazy 2 wins impacts the rest of your year potentially. If you went 500, well, you can't go 500 because there's 17 games. So even if they went 1 game over 500 the rest of the way, they'll make me do math. You're still sitting at what the rest of the way? If they're 1 game, if they're 2-0, and there's how many games? There's 15 games left, and they went 8-7, so you get to 10 wins. If you're 1 game over 500, you're the rest of the way, you're a 10-win team. They don't even have to play amazing. They don't have to be perfect. And the other side of it is, of course, if you lose the 2 games, and then you have to be perfect the rest of the way, because then you have to play 3 games over 500 just to be an above average team. And that shows you how important the beginning of the season is. The other part of it with the coaching is how prepared they've seemed for these games to start the season. More prepared than the Giants for sure. And then just as prepared for San Francisco, if not more. The coaching on both sides, the hiring of Brian Flores cannot be understated because it's allowed, I think, Kevin O'Connell to just do what he needs to do on the offensive side. Mike says week to week, play to play league. No doubt about that, Mike. Love the toughness they're showing on both sides. Health and growth are the key. You are 100% correct. Where the good coaches are truly tested, I believe in this 100%. This is a great point you're making, Mike, is they are tested in the second half of the season when everyone's got all the tape and all the data, and all the other coaches are prepared for what you're going to bring. Now, we already know that Brian Flores can do this because he's done it before in the past, but at the end of last year, the Detroit Lions and the Cincinnati Bengals, they figured some things out against this team, and injuries played a role, but they also got a lot of open wide receivers schemed against this. So that matters. How do teams adjust to Sam Darnold? Are there things that they're going to force Sam Darnold to do? And what I would be a little bit concerned about, just a shade, is the over the middle stuff with Sam Darnold. Some of the reads in the middle of the field, you kind of hold your breath a little bit. He nearly threw an interception early in the game going for the back of the end zone. Then he did throw an interception trying to target Jalen Naylor. Trent Sherfield over the middle of the field. Our team's going to try to force them into throwing into the middle of the field over and over and over again, because that's where maybe Darnold is willing to take his most risks, and even almost threw or had a ball batted down against the Giants that he threw a little bit late into the middle of the field. So to your point, growing as an offense, and the one thing that travels from week to week is a run game. And that can't be understated for them beating the 49ers. To be able to just hand it off to Ty Chandler, and Aaron Jones was okay. I think it was 3.6 yards per carry, but especially Ty Chandler, to be able to hand it off in the first 2 weeks and have that much success, then you can keep getting these performances from the quarterback, because you're always in favorable situations where you're not asking him to do too much. And if he is going to scramble his way out of pass rush and out of confusion in the secondary, that's another thing that can be sustainable, where, okay, he's confused or the pass rush is getting there, but he's still finding a way to get 15 yards anyway. That was impressive. Rick Tick, I like to see you do us versus Detroit, compare each position group with ours. Let me do that more quickly, because that would take a while. The quarterback position is so much better in Detroit as far as the record for a long period of time. Jared Goff's been to a Super Bowl. Jared Goff has led top 5 offenses, and he has the best offensive line in the entire league. That's the advantage that Detroit has. On defense, though, I'm only sort of buying their defense. I'm still not 100% there, but position by position, the Vikings probably have a better defense and defensive roster. They have Aiden Hutchinson, though, absolute freak, better than any player on the Vikings, I think. He's probably one of the top 5 players in the league. I mean, those games should be, now that we've seen it in the light of day, should be close, and they should be battles between a great offense and a great defense. But I don't think now, after 2 weeks, anyone could say, well, Detroit is wildly better than the Vikings, which is what they would have said 2 weeks ago. Ben, to use a boxing metaphor, the Vikings KO'd the Giants and then win by unanimous decision against the Niners. They traded blows and came out a clear winner. I like that description. And traded blows is serious when you have a team as physical as that. That's for sure. But yeah, the fact that they could go toe to toe, to use another metaphor there, that matters, because San Francisco is a team that can just beat you up and win that way. Marley, Texans have a ferocious D-line. Hunter was a beast last night. Anderson too. I think it's going to be more of a struggle than people think, but Houston's offensive line is bad. Need to contain Stroud. 2017 Vikes. You're already into the game prediction for next week. This is where we cannot understate the value of Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw. Brian O'Neill allowed 1 quarterback pressure yesterday and 19 snaps against Nick Bosa. That's just phenomenal. And Burns and Thibodeau were non-factors in week 1. That's just phenomenal. If you want your quarterback to outperform anything they've ever done before, give them Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill. Really. If they're going to have a chance, it's slowing down those guys. And they know Danielle Hunter really well. And there's no eliminating those players, but it's mitigating their impact. It's not letting them ruin the game, which they've done. And Dexter Lawrence got close to that in the interior, but they don't have an interior guy like that. So they're playing into the strength of the Vikings a bit. Brett says Stroud is incredible, but he's never seen a defense like Flores. No one has. It's one of one. Study the film on him all you want. He never does the same thing twice. Yeah, I agree. I don't. That's another thing, talking about understand. And when we all tying back into, are they really this good? Is Brian Flores really this good? Probably. Yeah. Yeah, I think he is. I think he is that. That doesn't mean no one will ever beat them. And CJ Stroud is as high IQ as a quarterback as I've ever seen, but Houston's offensive line looks suspect. And if you have a suspect offensive line against the Vikings, there's enough pass rush there that's going to cause major problems. This game against San Francisco was great football. It was one of the most enjoyable start to finish football games. It was wild, but it had great play, amazing play from Fred Warner, some great plays from Brock Purdy, great plays from the Vikings and Justin Jefferson. I expect the same thing from Vikings and Texans, where they got a bunch of stars, you got a bunch of stars, and let's see what happens. But each team has kind of their strengths and weaknesses. This will be the biggest test for the corners, I think. Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell. That's going to be a tough matchup. This will be how well is this cornerback group really put together. We're going to find that out. I Shot You 99 says, as per usual, the media said the 49ers had an off game and the Vikings got lucky. Well, there's a lot of media, so you're going to have to tell me who said that. Sort of like when you say that I heard this happen. You're like, you got to say from where. But as far as, well, I think that if you're the bigger picture people and if you're talking about the entire league, and if I was in that seat, if I was a TV talking head person I've got to analyze 32 teams. Think about how much time we spend here analyzing one team. How hard is it for those people to analyze 32 teams? But the rational take would be the 49ers are fine. They're going to be there. They're a great team. And they made it close despite the fact that the Vikings outplayed them and they had a bunch of mistakes. It's not often that a guy goes back to throwing the ball, just flies out of his hand. But that happened yesterday to the 49ers. So if I was in San Francisco and I was covering their team, I'd probably be saying, okay, that was bad on a lot of levels. But there's no reason to take them out of the NFC conversation for one loss at US Bank Stadium. So I understand where they're coming from for that. It wasn't luck, the reason the Vikings won, but I wouldn't say, oh, forget those 49ers. They're toast. No, actually on this side, you say that's a really impressive win because you know how good San Francisco actually is. But I didn't think there might be some way to create, and I tried to do this in 2022. I tried to sort of formulate some sort of luck evaluation because, and I think that there was someone who did this about penalties and turnovers and fumble luck, something like that. I think it's kind of been done before, but I tried to pick it all apart. And if we look at just yesterday's game and try to say, well, how lucky were they yesterday? The answer is definitely some. You rarely block a punt. You rarely have a guy have it fumble right into your hands. But it even now, with Aaron Jones's fumble and with Sam Darnold's interception, that it wasn't just all the random things happening to one team. It was really on both sides. We look on a play-to-play basis, the Vikings were better. That's where it matters the most, that win, rather than just saying it was fluky. Ben says when Chandler lowered his shoulder into that corner and got another 5, rubbing that dude over my eyes went wide. Yeah. Running. I think you meant running that dude over. Yeah. The other phrasing, is that like talk to text and that misread? Maybe you use the word rubbing more often in your texting. Running the dude over is what he did. Not safe for work. It's almost 9:00. This stuff always happens near 9:00. But to your point, Ty Chandler, this stood out to me last year. Ty Chandler's a physical runner. And with Kevin O'Connell, if he was going to go back in time, I promise he would have played Ty Chandler the whole year last year and just dealt with the issues with pass protection, because Chandler is a hell of a talent. And the question that I kept going back to was, all right, are they going to actually trust him? Are they going to be willing to have him in there for full drives and go back to him over and over? He is special with the football, and he has physical ability to run over someone. He can dodge tacklers. There was one time I think it was a pitch, and when he caught the pitch, the guy was right in his face, and he kind of juked right and got yards from it. If this is a real duo, then yeah, I mean that is a real running game. If this is a duo. And with Chandler, we now are working on going back to the late part of last season at Denver was where he kind of broke out. We're working on a sample size of Chandler that says this is who he is. Bench 295 says, watching the all 22 back a couple times, watching the tape. Let's go. Can't find anything exploitable in the way of offense or defense. Well, and when we go even position by position and we go, all right, well, where's the biggest weakness? Right guard is clearly it. And Brandel didn't grade well by PFF as a pass blocker, but he had a couple of penalties, which may have mattered to that grade because he didn't allow pressures. So at least they were able to survive the guard play. That is going to be an issue. Garrett Bradbury had a great game coming back. But as far as exploitable, if they have the running back duo, the receiver depth that we didn't know, you really don't know until you get out of camp and start seeing it. The defensive tackles have played well. How injuries could impact the defense, we might have to see. But, there isn't a whole lot that I sit there and say. In years past, we could go, man, the corners, 2020, the corners. You're trying to play Holton Hill out there. That's not great. 2021, once again, Rashad Breeland was the weak link on that team, and you could just attack him over and over again. There isn't that right now that anyone has discovered. And if they do, then, we'll see. But as of this moment, that hasn't really been an issue. Dan says, did there seem to be a revitalized energy in the stadium with the new look team? I think so. Week 1, a game like that, yes, there was going to be that. But everyone who's followed this team for a long time has seen this motif of a quarterback that came from somewhere else that no one believed in, and they made something happen. And there's a feeling of this, and we're not ready to declare it yet with Sam Darnold, but there's a certain feeling I've talked about before. Every time I talk to teams, reporters that have high expectations, I'm always asking them, hey, what's it like to have those high expectations? You heard me last week talking to the 49ers reporter about that. And he was saying that, if you lose a game like this, it is the end of the world in San Francisco, and the expectations are so high that every week becomes you better win. And what really all their seasons come down to just what happens in January is what it's like for those teams. But we agreed that the best situation from a fan perspective, as you're asking about the stadium, is when something surprises you. When you show up at the stadium, and there was a good amount of red in the stadium yesterday, when you show up in the stadium and you go, okay, well, we'll see what happens. And then all of a sudden you're taking the lead and you're making plays and you're getting a 97-yard touchdown, then that energy just builds on itself. And if they can from week to week that's where momentum could be real inside the stadium. I think week to week momentum, as we've seen from a lot of teams, is not a real thing. It's really matchup and situation based. But as far as how the fans feel about the team and the energy they're bringing inside the stadium, I do think that there's very serious momentum there. Is the Faithful says, I get what you're saying. I'm sure the Niners are praying with all the strength they don't mean in Minnesota in the playoffs. Yeah, that's for sure. There's something about that. But I think coming from the West Coast early game, that's always an issue maybe. But these last two games against San Francisco, really, they didn't play here since 2018, and their team was not as strong then. And then last year it was Flores again against Brock Purdy. But San Francisco, that one was a really great game by Kirk Cousins. He kind of won that game. And then Flores' defense and Brock Purdy getting the concussion and playing through it, throwing the interceptions. So it was a similar, the only reason it was different because it was a similar performance by the Vikings, and especially on their defense. The reason it's different is because the Vikings needed that to keep their season alive. And so you're saying, well, just pull off an upset to even talk about competing for the playoffs. Now that's not the vibe. The vibe is 2-0, and here we go with this win, and that's who this team's going to be. We'll see if it carries on, but that's why there's a little bit of a different feeling. But Flores versus Purdy seems to be maybe a mismatch. Jay Garrett, the ability to run on offense and ability to pressure the quarterback without blitzing are two most important improvements. 100%. Great observation. Yep, I totally agree with that. Jay Garrett left that observation like an hour ago, so I'm sorry if he doesn't get to hear how much I loved it because we've been a little slow with the comment section, but that's exactly right. That this team is more complete last year. There were pieces, but it was still a team in transition. It was still being torn down, and there were some parts left. So you're tearing down the house, but the sink still works. And this has been more rebuildy than I felt like it was. Like it actually is built and closer to a finished product than maybe we thought it was. But you're right. When you have multiple guys who could pressure the quarterback and multiple guys who can run effectively, and to have that run game, that was going to be a big test, and it has to continue over the whole season. But that was going to be a huge test, is can they actually continue to run over and over again? And they did that yesterday. Nick says, what was the actual blitz rate yesterday? Media makes it sound like every play was a crazy blitz. I don't think it was actually that high. Now, I don't know what it was. I only watched the film back, but I don't think that the blitzing was actually that high. I think when you say scheme, everyone just equates that to blitzing with Flores because that's who he is. But there was more of just confusion. So you're putting everybody at the line of scrimmage and kind of daring them to run at some points, and then dropping people out. I thought they did a lot of the stuff where they actually rushed 3 or only rushed 4, but you didn't know which 3 it was going to be. Sometimes they lined up 1 guy on one side and 3 guys on the other side, and they rushed the 3, but they didn't rush the 1. So several offensive linemen were just standing there looking around like, wait, I don't have anybody to block. That's the way that Flores messes with people, and he did that effectively. So yeah, I think it was more of just scheme was the thing that threw off Purdy, how the coverages presented themselves. When you can't identify before the play what the coverage is going to be, it's hard. But most defenses aren't able to have players who can just fly into those positions and then quickly identify where all the route combinations are. Harrison Smith's been doing this his whole career. You can put Harrison Smith wherever you want, and then he will find his way to the coverage he needs to be in. But you can't do that for all players most of the time. But with this group, you have enough high IQ guys who can do it. It's a big advantage. Brent says Vikings are building a great team. The hand-picked defensive additions by Flores, not only showing up, but his great coaching and scheme and seeing talent. That's where it's tying together. That's where you can be a good team into the future, is when you tie together somebody who's got a great scheme with the people who can actually execute it. Steel horse travels. Are we seeing in Darnold what Cousins couldn't do or wouldn't do? Sometimes. I also think we're also seeing some stuff that Darnold can't do that Cousins was good at. Cousins had a really good career in the NFL up to this point. I'm not watching the game. I don't know what's happening with the Falcons right now, but Kirk was very, very good at the intermediate areas of the field. So reading defenses and understanding where he was going to have guys, throwing with anticipation, getting how many catches did Jefferson have that are 15 yards, like over and over and over again. And he could drop it in the bucket as well as anybody I've ever seen. So when you run that 20, 25 yard slant or not slot fade, and you got to throw it up over the guy, Kirk was really excellent at that. And he could push it down the field, but he needed to get a lot of his body behind it. But if he got his body behind it, he could throw it there. What we're seeing from Darnold is the mobility, which obviously was not a part of Cousins' game. And also sometimes when you need extra velo on the throws, I think it's way less under control sometimes with Darnold, where you're going, what's going on back there? But the velocity on the throws is just different. And so there are plays that he can make that Kirk can't on the ground and then with his arm. But there are also a lot of plays that Kirk was making over the years that you wouldn't necessarily want to call for Sam Darnold. So I'm not there to be able to say, see, Darnold is better than Kirk Cousins. Or we're going to need a lot bigger sample than just 2 games to be able to say that. And Kirk's ability to bounce back emotionally, mentally from week to week from all the ups and downs. We haven't seen Darnold tested in that area yet, but that was something that for sure Cousins was great at over his career. Marley says Dallas Turner needs another few weeks to pick up the speed of the league. Once he clicks, he will make the pass rush unstoppable. It's a pick your poison. Yeah, so far, I think Dallas Turner's been fine over the first 2 weeks. The fact that they have not needed Dallas Turner to be the guy over the first 2 weeks really speaks to the strength of the team and how much they are filled with veterans, is that he can come in and play 20 snaps, and that's okay. The history of edge rushers in their first years is almost as bad as quarterbacks. It's a hard position to learn. And you mentioned this, the size, the speed, the technique, and all that. He could just play his role that he's being asked to play and let Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel handle the tough stuff as he develops. But it allows him not to be a big story each week too, because if Dallas Turner, well, he didn't get any pressures or whatever, if you're just playing the role and you're getting time to develop, then there isn't that, well, this rookie's not showing up, because he will have inconsistencies in his first year. You can guarantee that. JP says, truth is we're 2 weeks into the season. Got to avoid overreactions for good and bad. We can be a 9-10 win team. Would love to see us running and having more screens. Yesterday, they did screen and run quite well. And those things, making life easy for your quarterback, is something they've done in the first 2 weeks. Yep. Dan says, on the radio, they made it sound like Brandel was mauling guys yesterday. Any truth to him looking really good on the run game? Yeah, the run game, he was good. I think he was their highest graded run offensive lineman, him and Darisaw on that side. They can keep running. They can on that left side with Blake Brandel. That's what they wanted him for. He is a massive human being. And when he gets his hands on somebody, he can really push them. So yeah, I do think that he was good. Drew says, are the Vikings really this good? Yes, I believe from the beginning. Is Caleb Williams this bad? No, he's not NFL ready. That was the other part of it, is the headline is Caleb Williams this bad? And we kind of got into that with the young quarterback stuff. I would have some concerns about Caleb Williams early on, but I don't think he's as bad as we saw yesterday. It's just, is he going to pull himself out of what you could call the Justin Fields rut, which is the guy just doesn't see the field and then holds on to the ball too long and gets sacked all the time? Is that going to be something that he learns how to deal with or not? John says, I'm really excited that Nick Bosa backside chop on Darnold's arm didn't cause the fumble. That was incredible by Sam Darnold. Saw that in slow motion, was ready. I did too. I mean, that was one where you saw it develop and went, oh, look out. But yes, you're right. That was something that Kirk Cousins fumbled a lot. And I mean, Darnold had a turnover yesterday, but he used the fumble a lot. It was something that wasn't talked about really enough. And I was interested to see Darnold and how much pressure would be his fault, because historically it surprised me when I looked up his numbers, when I did my article about whether he could really do this thing and take this big step. And I was actually very surprised when I discovered that Sam Darnold's numbers, he did not bring an enormous amount of his own pressure, according to PFF's metrics. They keep track of which position was responsible. He didn't bring a lot of his pressure. And I would have expected that he would have, just based on his history. And I think it was really just playing behind really terrible offensive lines, because I didn't feel like he caused a lot of his own pressure yesterday. And he wasn't under pressure very much at all. But he doesn't seem to be somebody that just holds the ball forever. Janet says, I'm stoked about the Vikings defense. Physical, smart, aggressive, selfless. I've never been this confident about the D in a very long time. Just such a great joy to watch. Well, I agree with you that we were sitting there yesterday talking exactly what you're saying about this defense and how many violent players they've put together. There's just so many guys that are proven and tough and who have histories of sacking people and all that. I mean, it's just who can handle anything that Brian Flores asks him to do. And you can almost go position by position and talk about the whole guy's history and how it's played out. Blake Cashman, he's been in this league a long time. He developed and then last year steps forward, and now what a perfect fit, right? It's from top to bottom. It is very impressive and filled with veteran players. The only concern would be in the cornerback group. If anybody gets banged up, then you're talking about Fabian Morrow and you're talking about Caleb Evans and guys like that. Probably Evans, since he's been the one who's been active. So they have to stay healthy on defense to continue to be this good. Because if Dallas Turner gets to stay in that role, and if Caleb Evans doesn't have to play for Stephon Gilmore or something, but Gilmore just looks great. This guy off the couch and into playing 60 something snaps against the San Francisco 49ers in week 2. Amazing stuff. Let's see. Malkill says Darnold driving the offense down the field in crunch time without Jefferson, Addison, and Hawkinson probably went a long way to further filling Sam's bank account. That could be true. I think filling his confidence. Filling his confidence is important. Sean says, love the shows, Matt, but if I have to say, it's been awesome seeing Manny back on a regular basis. Love his takes. Manny's one of my favorite people of all time. We go to Lynx games together. He's a great friend. He's a really smart guy and the biggest football nut next to me I've ever met in my life. So me too. Manny has another job in radio. And so I don't want to make him in the off season be coming on and doing draft simulations or something. But once the season gets going, it's just so good to work with Manny. Always loved working with him together when we were at 1500. Love working with him now. I appreciate you saying that, Sean. Digits, offensive line, defensive line, the difference between high draft picks, playoff teams, and Super Bowl winners, usually by graduation. Scrambling quarterbacks can mitigate this a bit, but not too much. I mean, what you're seeing right now is and I think this always goes for it, if you have a average offensive line, you can certainly survive and operate as an offense. And if you have a average defensive line, you can certainly create enough pressure to cause problems and play your scheme. If you have great ones of either one, you have a chance to play for the Super Bowl because there are so few teams that can stop the pass rush very consistently. And I'm not ready to declare the Vikings as having a great offensive line. I'd like to see Dalton Reisner playing right guard in the near future. But if he comes in or Ed Ingram improves, I'd rather see Reisner at this point. Then they are going to have a pretty darn good offensive line. And the tackles are so important against these teams that they're playing. That is a big deal. So anyway, well, we've been going on for quite some time. I know a lot of you left more comments, and I have things to write. Got to get ready for tomorrow. Big day tomorrow. We got coordinators talking with us, and Jeremiah Searle's podcast, as always. Wednesday night will be the chat, more of a live chat. Thursday night, Manny's back. Lots of guests popping in. Going to have a porch podcast with Will Raggets. So, lots to go. But thanks everybody for hanging around, having this really good conversation. That's it. I'm just getting to scrolling down to the point where you guys are reacting to Manny calling for 11-6. And that was a really fun time. But I think that's how everybody's feeling right now, is that this team has a lot of energy to it. But I mean, everybody knows that, yeah, it's a long season and there's a long way to go and anything can happen. But as of right now, that was one of the most fun and entertaining the seasons games that we've seen in a long time. And maybe it will be seasons as well. So thanks so much for joining, everybody. Really appreciate the big crowd here tonight. As always, great to see when there's a lot of energy from you guys. Keep an eye out for tomorrow with Jeremiah Searles. And then on Wednesday, we'll do this all chat Wednesday, all your questions, nothing else on Wednesday night. So I look forward to that, and I'll see you guys then. Thanks everybody. And we'll catch you later. Football.